Thank you, Yash. We had some IT difficulties with email, so I gave them a presentation on my. I had to give them the presentation on my USB, and I gave them the wrong presentation. But we will go with it because we are dynamic. Here's what I'm going to talk about because I don't have the deck. So what I was saying was this is the wrong presentation, but I want to show you this video anyway because actually it's quite beautiful, and some of you have seen it before. Forgive me, but I'll make the point I want to make. So, we are in a very pivotal moment right now with artificial intelligence. And there's a lot of interest in taking AI and plugging it into education. And the problem I find is that we are not recognizing, and we heard from Geeta Veerjawan just a moment ago, how extraordinarily underinvested education is to begin with, but also, frankly, how much the education enterprise has, to put it bluntly, ignored what we know about how human beings learn, what makes learning durable, what inspires us, and what is impactful in a scientific sense. The science of learning, which is the point of this panel, is all about understanding the cognitive psychology, and Annabelle will be defining it a little bit more, of learning, and the practice of learning. The challenge we have today is in schools around the world and in universities around the world, you have teachers who operate with a very fundamental fallacy. And I'll explain the fallacy to you in the following sense. We assume that the professor has a pen and the students' brains are sheets of paper. And all the professor has to do is state what needs to be learned. And in doing so, they're writing, inscribing on students' brains. And then you're done. That is a flawed model. And we know this from philosophers. We know this as parents. We know it when you look at animals. And by the way, starting with a video of a kitten, let me just tell you, is always a good idea. So I'm going to show you this video anyway. But the challenge is our entire education platform is built that way. And it goes back historically, actually, to the struggle between two great icons in education. One who should be respected, Dewey, and one who probably should not, a man by the name of Thorndike. And Thorndike tried to reduce education to very basic, mechanistic training paradigms of the sort that he used on things like pigeons and cats. And that, unfortunately, is the system we've inherited. But deep inside, we always knew that actually great education happens in other ways. And I want to call out Manu's fantastic talk earlier, which is great education occurs through practice. It occurs through effortful learning. If you're not putting in effort, if smoke is not coming out of your ears, you're not learning, sorry. Okay? If it is too easy, Alok asked me, does it mean we need to torture students? No. You want desirable difficulties, not undesirable difficulties. If it is too easy, you aren't learning. If a student says to you, I want to learn by sound because I'm better at it, sorry, that's not necessarily the better way to learn. That might be easy for you, but that's not necessarily how you learn. So all these principles, we keep forgetting them. What would you say if the medical profession did this? Yet we know education is so fundamentally important to the future of humanity, especially with the advent of this great competitor to humanity, which is AI. And yet we ignore the science of learning and we go by instinct and fallacies, and that is the system we have today. We, that is Andres Salazar Gomez, sitting somewhere here, and I just wrote a white paper on this. You can see it on the M3S website. We talk about how, if we want to incorporate AI into learning, we better fix learning first. If you just bolt on AI as some sort of magical pixie dust panacea, that's going to fix schools. Forget it. In fact, I'll go so far as to say that when I see a bunch of this AI stuff, I find it bluntly gimmicky. Okay, that's the comment that Geeta made about, people buying a bunch of Alexas because it's so glamorous and it has this veneer of technology, and therefore it's going to be better learning. So this is a pivotal moment. We have to fix the way in which schools operate. We have to fix the way in which higher ed operates. And here's the weird thing. If you fix schools to take on things like loneliness caused by social media, to take on loneliness as a result of student isolation during COVID, the way to fix schools is something called a flipped classroom. That's not enough, though, by the way. You just flip a classroom, it ain't going to work, because you need the student to go there motivated to learn. And actually, Manu talked about something he came up with, productive failure. You have the student try something, fail, and then they go into the classroom hungry. And there are other techniques for making the classroom work. If you did that, and the professor, instead of yammering on, as I'm doing now, we love the sounds of our own voices, guilty as charged, right? If the professor turned to a coach, if the learning were more peer, right? Highly scaffolded, there's something called Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, ZPD, where you teach just in the margin or where the student understands, but not too difficult. And as the student gets better, you increase the challenge, like a great tennis coach might, right? If you try to learn from Roger Federer playing at a Roger Federer level, you aren't going to learn. A great coach comes down to your level, is a little bit better and gets you better. If you did all that, it turns out it addresses many of the risks that AI in education could tangibly create. Like, if you just deploy AI in education, you will very likely get superficial learning, you will very likely get a depletion of critical thinking, you will very likely get social isolation. And we today must take on education as a whole if we're going to bolt AI onto it. Otherwise, we might end up with the worst of both worlds. So with that, a kitten video, because that's what I happen to have. And so this video is from BBC, I think it's about 30 years old. It's about a kitten learning, okay? And I used this a couple of days ago, but this video shows how kittens form what I will call their foundation models of the world. So let's see if it plays.
In just 3 weeks. But this is where spiders and cats differ. Though physically the cats are now quite developed, their predatory programming is incomplete. Now, to start developing the mind. First, their instinct makes them curious. Instinct makes them play. Play links body with mind.
Embodied intelligence.
They start to look like predators, focused, fast, alert. But at this stage, the rules are simple. Catch anything that moves. After all, they could be anywhere, and anything could be prey. But a cat can't live on feathers and stones. This simple instinct needs a focus. Enter mother. She now comes back from hunts with dead prey. This is the new focus of the kitten's play. The kittens get what she can catch, a sample of the world of prey outside. She is programming the predatory machine, preparing it for future hunting. Sight, smell, feel, taste. This is what should be eaten. For the next stage, live prey.
authentic assessment.
Now the mind is focused on specific prey, a lesson in handling. How fast is it? How does it move? How do you catch it? Without this training, kittens will never be good hunters. This time, the vole escapes. Finally, into the field to put training into practice. They go into the outside world with skills that basic instinct can't provide alone. They have the advantage of learning. The predator hunts, fueled by instinct, fine-tuned by learning.
So I wanted to show this, actually I showed it in the other presentation, but I think it makes my point equally, which is, ladies and gentlemen, I think we stand at a very pivotal moment in technology and society, and AI is this amazing thing. And my personal big worry, and I would say the worry of a lot of people in our space, is we are seeing it as a shortcut to a problem that we did not confront earlier, and it will not solve the problem. So with that, having just pivoted on the wrong presentation, I'll kick off our panel. We have three amazing panelists, and maybe I'll request Annabelle first to come and talk about your definition of science of learning and so on, and then Lekun, you next, and then finally Michael. So Annabelle, thank you.
Well, a very good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll share from neuropsychological and cognitive neuroscience on integrating science of learning insights to impact education through AI. So our core focus will be leveraging science of learning and AI to address critical challenges such as scalability and individual differences in learning by integrating diverse multimodal data for personalized educational experience. And I hope to highlight potential insights on how AI can drive education to enhance learning. Okay, let's start with what is science of learning. Now, in the last 30 years or so, with the advent of non-invasive functional neuroimaging research that has provided us an exponential increase about the knowledge of our brains. And as shown here, there's a rapid increase in research in terms of publications of fMRI studies in the last 2 decades. However, it was only in the last 10 years or so that this research has been more widely applied to education. So to see how we can systematically optimize learning. Now, this has contributed to the development of an interdisciplinary area called the science of learning, integrating knowledge from psychology for the cognitive processes, neuroscience to understand about the brain, and education for practical applications. And then later, we harnessed on related fields in computer science and engineering for the technology. However, there remains some ambiguity about its scope and definition in the field and also in the literature. So to address this, we conducted a scoping review a couple of years ago and proposed a working definition for the field, and that is the science of learning is a scientific study of the underlying basis of learning with the goal of describing, understanding, or improving learning across developmental stages and diverse contexts. So this definition serves as a foundation for further discussion and refinement. Now, when we look at learning across the lifespan, we find that adults actually learn quite differently from school-age children. So adults are often self-directed, right? We learn from experience, and we focus on problem solving that's relevant to our lives. And this demands a developmental and aging perspective. as cognitive processes and motivation evolve throughout the lifespan. So our recent comprehensive systematic review on the science of adult learning that's supported by the Ministry of Education indicates that while healthy aging can show general declines in some cognitive areas like processing speed and explicit memory, what we call fluid abilities, other areas such as vocabulary or implicit learning, known as crystallized abilities, tend to remain stable or even improve. We also found that factors like higher education, socioeconomic status, and our baseline cognitive function can positively influence these trajectories. Importantly, our findings highlight that the most effective interventions usually are a combination of cognitive and physical training, and technology and multimodal approaches can amplify its effects. It is also critical to note that factors like age, baseline cognition, or brain function and structure, and even the dose and duration of training all play a role of how these interventions can be effective. So, nevertheless, we still need more research to look at our middle adulthood, or mostly the working adults. And also, we do need to validate all these promising interventions within real-world context. So, now on to the challenge. While science of learning provides valuable insights into how we learn, applying these insights at a large scale in diverse educational settings or learning environments is difficult. So the core challenge is scalability. Education isn't one size fits all, we all know that, and real-world learning involves significant individual differences. So from a child in the kindergarten or a senior trying to learn a new skill. So each learner has our own unique prior knowledge, learning preferences, and cognitive strengths and motivations. So personalizing learning for millions of individuals across the entire lifespan becomes complex and resource intensive without new approaches. So this leads us to a critical question. Can artificial intelligence provide a breakthrough for what we call precision education? Well, it seems to be quite promising, as the power of AI lies in its ability to process and synthesize vast amounts of multimodal information. So imagine collecting data not just from traditional tests, but from behavioral patterns, cognitive strategies, and even neuroimaging data like fMRI or EEG, giving us insights into brain activity during learning. We can also integrate physiological measures like heart rate variability or eye tracking, also social and personality factors, and demographics like SES or the learning environment itself. So by analyzing these diverse data streams, AI can help us not only understand what is happening during learning, but also identify what truly works for learning and under what specific conditions. This means that AI can accelerate our research by analyzing complex data sets, generating new hypotheses on the go, and providing real-time insights into pedagogical effectiveness, thus helping to advance our educational research while studies are still underway. So in a way, it can help to make our research process more naturalistic, like what you saw in the video with the kitten, and become a robust end-of-one research design with inbuilt iterative processes that has an ongoing impact. While AI's capabilities are advancing rapidly, it's important to note that achieving full integration and predictive power across all these complex factors is still an active area of research. So all these are still at a very high level. So more dedicated studies are indeed needed to validate these applications and refine AI models for robust educational use. So the strategic integration of science of learning and AI is key. It's about aligning the research insights from neuropsychology and cognitive neuroscience, especially regarding adult learning and development with the innovative capabilities of AI. So this synergy opens up new pathways. We can move beyond simply identifying what's effective to proactively redesigning learning experiences that are precisely tailored to each individual within the AI-supported system. And aligned with pedagogy, we could consider systems that continuously learn from all this multimodal data. So how a learner's brain responds, their behavioral patterns, their context, and then refine their strategies to provide targeted and impactful interventions, whether for a child struggling with math or an adult trying to master a new professional skill. So this iterative process where AI accelerates research and then applies these emerging insights to design creates a powerful loop. So while the full realization of these AI-driven systems is still a research frontier, the foundational capabilities are emerging, and continued research is essential to fully validate and optimize these approaches. So ultimately, if we could effectively integrate science of learning and AI, we envision a future of education that is more responsive, effective, and equitable, supporting lifelong learning and development for everyone. Now, lastly, there's still a caveat of alignment with human values when we talk about personalization of anything, right? Since we would need to give up our personal information for individualization, so there is also a lot of consideration needed for data confidentiality and anonymization for safety. So I look forward to discuss more on scalability and the impact of AI in helping to personalize our learning experiences with the science of learning. Thank you for your attention.
Good afternoon. I'm Lek Woon from Ministry of Education, where I direct the education research effort. So I'm a practitioner, policymaker, and consumer of research. So what I would like to share with you today is some problem we face related to futures of learning and work, which we think science of learning, as what Annabelle has explained to us, can actually inform. I will also share some thoughts about AI and how AI might be able to support science of learning research and potentially transform the practice of learning and teaching. But before I go into the challenge statement of our science of learning grant, which I will share a bit later, I just want to share maybe a bit of reflection why education has been such a great challenge to human civilization. And I think that's particularly because in our current stage of development, we actually have industrialized education and learning. So as you can see by Sanjay just now, a lot of the learning that we observe of the cat actually happens at the individual level, right? And then towards the end, a few cats actually gather and they actually interact, and maybe they challenge each other and they actually improve their learning. But in the current industrial model, in the classroom and in our school, learning and teaching happens in a one-to-many kind of relationship. You have one teacher teaching many students, each with their own different needs as well as effective kind of levels. And that is actually one of the main challenges of education in school, in classroom, one-to-many relationship. Secondly, education involves complex human function. And if you again look at our stage of human development, civilization, actually we don't have a very good handle of understanding in a very scientific, objective manner, complex human function and complex human behavior. And what makes it even more complex in a learning and teaching setting is that even the outcome, the desired outcome itself is actually often controversial and not easily agreed upon. So that creates a lot of measurement issue, measurement difficulty, which is why within education, there's always this tension between whether you want to adopt a more quantitative, objective approach of describing learning, or you want to actually adopt a more holistic, maybe less reductionist approach to actually look at learning. That is the second problem. We're dealing with complex human function. And I would think that a particular difficult task of a teacher is not just to foster learning, but ultimately is actually to change human behavior and human mindset, right? Because if you step into a classroom, whether it is a tertiary setting or a primary school or secondary school, you understand that the greatest difficulty of the teacher is actually to motivate the students. Because if the students are actually ready to learn, in fact, learning might be easy as a cat picking up the skills of catching a rat. But the problem is that the cats are probably a model teacher in the video, because a model student in the video, because a typical student in our classroom, they are not willing learners. And motivating the learner becomes a primary difficulty. So I'll go quickly into the three challenge statements that Ministry of Education have articulated for our Science of Learning grant. So very quickly, in RIE 2025, Research Innovation and Enterprise RIE 2025, Human Health and Potential Science of Learning grant was actually started. And the program seeks to actually support science-based research that can explicate the mechanism of learning and skills acquisition so that we can actually develop effective education intervention to advance human potential. So as part of our effort, and in our annual grant call, we actually articulate challenge statements, and we invite researchers to submit research proposal to address them. So I'll share three statements related to science of adult learning as well as AI, and I'll go through them very quickly. So the first is how to leverage science of learning to ensure effective transfer of learning from one domain to another and from one context to another. So this can hope to ensure that our students, workers, what they learn can prepare them not only for their current, but actually for their future jobs in workplace that will be constantly changing, especially in this period of rapid technological advancement with AI. Our second challenge statement is related to adult learning and aging. So how can we leverage science of learning to enhance acquisition and skills and retention of learning across adulthood? And how do changes in brain structure, physiology, and social emotional states across adult lifespan impact how adults learn and acquire skills? How can these changes be leveraged to enhance motivation to learn and to upskill? The third challenge statement is related to AI, right? A favorite topic today. So how might we leverage science of learning, AI, to understand the impact of technological application, including AI, on the acquisition of skills and knowledge? How can science of learning inform the development, assessment of existing and emerging technology and enable intervention that optimize learning outcomes? So the 2025 Science of Learning grant call is ongoing, and these same three challenge statements will likely be featured in the next grant call. So we welcome research ideas and proposal from everyone who can actually help us address them. So this is my final slide. I'll take the next few minutes to share thoughts about how AI might support R&D in science of learning and transform the practice of learning and teaching, hopefully. So, to build on what Annabelle shared just now, I think we are starting to build up our multimodal data sets And we are hoping that maybe we can actually use machine learning models trained on this big data to make accurate learning predictions. And once we have some of this accurate machine learning data that can actually predict who will learn, who will not learn, when will they learn, when they will not learn, and why, we can actually develop applications and intervention to improve learning outcomes cheaper, faster, as well as better. But what we are really hoping is that maybe through this experience, we can arrive at a foundation model for learning. So I was just reading and I realized that actually even in machine learning, there's actually something called transfer learning, which I thought is so similar to the grand challenge of the difficulty in transferring learning or knowledge from one setting to another. So maybe if we can actually develop such a foundation model, we can actually come out with not only predictive model, but also explainable model of actually a very under-theorized learning mechanism, or the complex mechanism about how we solve complex and adaptive problem, how a novice actually develops into an expert, and how, like I say, we transfer learning from one context to various contexts. And it is only through a better theory of learning and knowledge that we can actually transform learning and teaching. So what I'm really hoping is that maybe AI afford us an opportunity beyond the more traditional divide between adopting a quantitative approach or qualitative approach or mixed method approach. Maybe AI can provide some insights into the underlying level of learning and knowledge, which is actually tacit and not quite easily explainable, and in so doing can actually help us transform learning and teaching. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
So we have a diverse scientific panel for a problem that demands that sort of diversity, I think. My name's Michael Lee. I'm a cognitive modeler. So a research day for me means looking at some data that measure human behavior in some form, intelligent human behavior, and working on coding a formal mathematical, statistical, algorithmic model of that behavior that helps you describe the behavior that you observe, explain why the behavior is like that, and make predictions about what would happen under altered circumstances. We've heard a lot today in the first keynote and in the first panel, especially sort of asking for a capability to understand humans in that formal, predictive sort of way as part of the science of learning, especially in a human-AI teaming context. So I thought it'd be interesting to reflect upon how I view myself and my peers' work in the cognitive modelling community as being able to serve those sorts of needs. So here are 4 criticisms of the field and things I think we're not doing so well. This is like a personality test. You could view this as being pessimistic, but of course every weakness is also an opportunity. So here's 4 opportunities for cognitive modelers to do better in service to all. First one is, I think computational cognitive modelling has overemphasized trying to find the invariants or the things that are the same about cognition, like the physical laws, if you like, the things that make us human, and underemphasized the individual differences, the things that make us interesting. I think you could extend that to say we don't have very many models of formal cognitive models of collaboration either, which crucially hinge upon those individual differences. To the extent we do, they're often in educational settings, which shows the benefit of this solution-driven approach of sourcing your scientific problems from areas that have real-world problems rather than just following whatever's happening in academic conferences. The second one is that development, cognitive models of development, that's really treated synonymously as meaning child development. If you hear that you might have a new colleague who works in development, that means they either work with infants or 2-year-olds or 3-year-olds. It doesn't address adult learning. So there's a big gap in understanding how learning might be different in a formal cognitive modelling sense at the adult level. A third one is that not enough is done to integrate models of memory and representation and prior knowledge with models of decision-making and learning needed to give a complete account of something complicated like an adult learning setting. These models are developed in stovepipes and there needs to be greater integration. And then a fourth one is that there's been an overemphasis in cognitive models of learning on error-driven learning, the ones where you make some sort of mistake as instructed by a teacher or the external world giving you some sort of feedback, and you work so that you're less likely to make that mistake in the future. So your learning is driven by error. But that's only one sort of learning, and we heard this mentioned, I was really pleased to hear this mentioned many times this morning. That means we're studying error-driven learning at the expense of implicit learning, self-regulation, adaptation, other forms of change that people go through that don't necessarily require those explicit error signals. And I wanted today to use the rest of my time to give an example of that last point and talk about a little research experiment and a model that highlights the need for taking that sort of form of learning, the self-regulation and adaptation, seriously. So this is almost a 20-year-old experiment which explains the graphics. This was about people learning in a maze where they could either go left or right, a very simple binary decision, and there's an advisor sitting there, so think of this as human AI teaming in a prototypical form that might say, for example, go right at this point. People could do that and they would either get rewarded or not for doing that. So incredibly simple, but many of these trials, the advisor might advise them to go left on some of the trials, and then crucially, sometimes the advisor would say, I don't know. So it was possible that the advisor would give no advice in this learning or decision-making advice situation. So as we did this, we measured the decisions that people made and we measured the confidence they had in their decisions. You could think of that confidence as being the trust they had in the advice that they were being given, because it's the only thing they've got to go on in this impoverished learning situation. We explored different sorts of advice-giving regimes. So you can see the one pictured here has this solid bar at 70%. That means if the advisor was more than 70% certain they knew the answer, then they would provide the go left or right advice. So the advisor has normative knowledge that there is, say, an 83% chance that the answer is left, then they would say go left. If they only knew that it was 55% likely to be left, this advisor would say, I don't know. So they're thresholding on that 70%. But that's not the only possibility. Many of us are lucky enough to have friends who hardly ever give us advice, but when they do give us advice, it's wonderful advice and we listen to them very carefully and we follow it because it's so rare. So that might be an advisor who only gives advice if they're more than 90% certain. And then we're all, I guess, unlucky enough to have friends at the other end of the spectrum who have an opinion on everything and they're right about half of the time. So they're always... So we measured all of these conditions and we're interested in two things. On the left panel, you can see the decisions that people made. In the green at the top is when advice was given. Basically, people pretty much always followed the advice. What else are you going to do? It's the only information you've got to go on. You were told to go left, people generally go left. If you were told to go right, they go right. The red bar underneath shows what people did when they were just told, I don't know, and they're just faced with two alternatives and no other information, and they pretty much guessed. So 50-50. Okay. That all makes sense and there's nothing surprising. What's interesting on the right is the measure of confidence that people had in those decisions. So if you look at the green bar on the right that shows the inverted U shape, what that shows is that the trust or the confidence was highest at around about the 70 or 80% mark, and critically it's lower at both of the ends. So there was lower trust for the person who's always giving an opinion but it's not necessarily accurate. There was also lower confidence for the person who rarely gave opinions, even when this was a case in which they did give an opinion. So there's something counterintuitive to explain that. Perhaps even more counterintuitive is the confidence in the guesses. These are just guesses sitting at 50-50, but they don't have equal confidence. People are getting less confident in the cases where they're not getting much advice, even in their guesses. And if you think about that for a moment, this is counterintuitive. If things were based upon accuracy, on an error signal that was being corrected, the predictions for confidence would look like something on the right. This is actually a sort of formal model fit that's being done, not just guess, that confidence should go up as the advice veridically becomes more accurate. That as the advice being given is more accurate, you'd expect your confidence to increase, and you would expect no impact on the guesses, that they should always be equally confident. And so I don't have time to dig into the modelling details, but one modelling framework that can account for this is one that critically uses an idea of self-regulation or adaptation as well as the error signal. So this is a model that learns with uncertainty from the external feedback, and that helps you explain, or that allows you to explain that green inverted U-shaped curve on the right with confidence. It's basically If you're preserving uncertainty about the quality of the advice you're being given, this external information, you can see whether you got it right or wrong by following the advice. There are two ways you could doubt yourself. One is if the advice is centered around 50%, then there's some chance it's wrong. That's why confidence would be lower for those conditions. But if you're not getting very much advice, you're uncertain as to what the quality of this agent that is guiding and assisting you is, and that uncertainty allows for the possibility they could be wrong. And it's in the middle that you get peaked enough posterior distributions, if you like, in Bayesian terms, that are far enough away from 0.5 that you are at the most confident in following that advice. The second thing the model does is self-regulate or adapt, and it's trying to achieve a target level of confidence. So the internal regulatory mechanism in this modeling framework is you want to make decisions with some level of confidence, and you will adapt how much evidence you seek to achieve that. If you're not getting very much advice, you have to open the jaws very wide to look for as much evidence as possible, and that leads to lower confidence in those cases in which you're getting I don't know advice. It's possible to get higher confidence because of the limited sampling if those boundaries are set more narrow. That probably needs a little unpacking, but you can see again that the model fits to the data being shown there, and the key is that the model has both of these capabilities. It not only learns from external feedback, but it internally self-regulates to the learning environment that it's in. So I think there's a moral there. Any partnership of any sort requires adjustment and compromise. We're all aware of this all of the time. So a focus of AI on adapting to what people do is only half the story. People are going to adapt to the AI, and if we want to build a system that is optimized and robust, we need to be able to model that system, including the artificial intelligence, the human, and the interaction between the two, so that we have a complete dynamic system that can be optimized. And that means we need models, cognitive models of how formal cognitives, predictive cognitive models of how people learn, adapt, and self-regulate. And I think this requires solving all sorts of major challenges in the field of cognitive modelling. I've already mentioned individual differences, and I've mentioned the need for group or team or collaborative setting models. I think it also requires thinking about the dynamics of confidence and trust in intelligent agents for both the human and the artificial, if we're going to build systems that are robust, resilient, and are capable of teaching people in effective and scalable ways. Thanks.
We'll kick it off with a question, and I was saying, Michael, your presentation was very interesting. As we understand how people behave, as we model people better, hopefully it'll inform education. But if you take a more fundamental aspect of this, the kitten video is about implicit learning. The kitten did not attend any lectures, right? It simply learned by observing. That's an amazing thing about mammals, particularly. I mean, mammals make this compromise with nature that is, we're immature. Human beings are not permitted to drive until they're 25. Some are immature much longer. Archon's looking at me accusingly. But the compromises were very adaptable, right? So if you take learning, what we have done, and you made the point, Lekun, is we've industrialized it by taking what can be made explicit and then sort of pumping it into students' heads in classrooms. But you could make the argument that the implicit has suffered. So the question for the panel is, based on the science of learning, and it's a question of why you talked about it, the science of learning has not penetrated, how do we scale the implicit? Especially if AI makes the explicit even more commoditized, right? So philosophical question. How do you scale implicit learning, which seems to be so fundamental and we've ignored it? And it's going to become even more important. Any takers? Too difficult? No. Reflection, there you go.
This is indeed a very complex question. But we look at implicit learning, right? Nothing is obvious, but it's going on. So from neuropsychology and cognitive sciences, we come from looking at more at similar to procedural learning to a certain extent. But also, I think information from neuroimaging, cognitive neuroscience, could help us to understand and measure even physiological measures that doesn't seem to be so overt, right? Could also help us to correlate with some of these implicit processes. That's where multimodal data is important, that if we could integrate, because for us, what becomes obvious is more of the explicit component. But at the same time, actually is happening, implicit learning is happening at the same time. So if we could couple these or even provide more information for underlying mechanisms as they come in to help us to understand better. So that's where the multimodal scalability is a huge problem.
So when you say multimodal, I mean, where would you go with that? What does multimodal mean? Is it multimodal AI? What are you talking about? Or multimodal learning?
Yes, so we're looking at just now all the components of measures when a person is learning and in situations. So there's many different types of information going on at the same time. So in traditional research, it has been difficult to do that because we need to control one and then look at what's happening the other. And then you need a lot of research back and forth to validate things. But if we could access that together, that's where the problem is, where technology-wise, we have not been able to do that efficiently.
So something that measures affect, emotion, other things as the person
at the same
is being,
time,
right? Arousal, things like that. Right?
Yes, all these different types of data streams at the same time to then see if we could tag on to what's happening underlying wise and also what's happening in terms of what we call implicit learning.
Got it.
So I like the answer of more detailed measurement and understanding of the multidimensional nature of the person, but I think you could couple that with a much richer conception of the learning environment that they're in. So rather than thinking of learning instruction, thinking of learning environments. If I was going to have a fifth criticism of my field, running off the bottom of the page, it would be that cognitive modelling is eerily body-hating. It likes the idea of disembodied cognition, but we're not like that. We live in an external world, we have a physical delineation from that world, and there's enormous psychological evidence that situatedness and embodiedness is crucial to all sorts of cognitive capabilities and cognitive behaviours, including learning. And so I think the idea of creating learning environments would be, one of the first payoffs would be in things like implicit learning.
So a learning environment where the student or the learner is exposed to, so for example, if you wanted to teach, let's say, mechanical engineering, which is my field, a learning environment where there are actual mechanical engineers doing things and you're sort of watching them in addition to learning the theory and so on, right?
Right, and this is obvious if you think about procedural skills. Learning some sport or something like that is not done through instruction on the blackboard, it's done in a physically embodied way.
No, I learned my cycling entirely by reading instructions. It's completely explicit. There was no implicit practice at all.
Maybe from a practitioner perspective, what we have been doing in our classroom, in our school, to scale good learning is through good teachers. Right, which is what the keynote speaker earlier have mentioned. So, and that's where the training of a good teacher and the identification of a good teacher becomes complicated. So, on the one hand, I think you need someone with all the deep, with high ability, high cognitive ability in order to be a good teacher. They need to have a accumulation of all the explicit knowledge that over all the years through either formal training in all the disciplinary areas. But I think what is also very important is actually all the tacit knowledge that you picked up, how to facilitate good teaching, how to actually empower your students to actually learn in an implicit manner, how to create a time and space for them to do so, how to actually motivate them. And the way we have been doing in Singapore is to identify a trainee teacher with the highest ability, or with the higher ability. They have the necessary education qualification. You stare hard at them, you interact with them, you hope to pick up those that genuinely want to actually develop their students and allow their students to stand on their shoulder so that their measure of success is a success of their students and not the teachers themselves, right? So that requires certain human judgment to pick the right candidates, and to do so in a setting that is scalable. In a Singapore context, we take in between 1,000 to 3,000 trainee teachers a year, depending on which period of the history you are in. So it's a complicated endeavor, and I think this whole process can be made far more efficient if we have a better understanding and a theory or cognitive model of tacit knowledge, implicit learning, something that is not easy quantifiable.
But, I'm just be provocative with AI around the corner, in many cases here, the idea of teaching is going to change, right? So you're picking teachers now. We're still a very test-oriented society. And OpenAI, ChatGPT, I saw the news today, or a couple of days ago, in terms of various tests, is outperforming humans. Humans outperform it in other respects. And yet, since our system is so test-oriented, they're picking teachers who are test-oriented in an era when tests become commoditized. Solving tests is automatable. So how do we prepare for that? Obviously, there's no quick answer, but I'm curious, what do the panelists think about it?
I think like a lot of experts that we have interacted with have highlighted in AI world, or if there is so-called post-AI world, then the non-decorative knowledge, knowledge that's related to maybe critical thinking, knowledge related to human, or rather cognitive function related to critical thinking, metacognition, the ability to actually make judgment and discern the right answer from the wrong answer. Those skills probably will be increasingly important. But my personal reservation is that all these meta-level kind of cognitive function actually builds on decorative knowledge as a foundation.
Sure.
Right, because you need to have basic foundational understanding or even facts in order to make assessment of whether an output from AI is accurate or not accurate, high quality or low quality. So I do feel that especially when we are dealing with young learners, in fact, perhaps a lot of the learning might remain more or less the same, because you are building the foundation. That is not to say that the teacher and the education should be oblivious of the advancement that the AI brings about. Because clearly, the introduction of AI to a teacher can actually make the teaching a lot more efficient. But I would imagine that actually in preschool classroom, in kindergartens, in the first few levels of your primary school, maybe the classroom or the learning experience might remain more or less the same. Right? It's just like the cat. How would AI actually transform the learning of a cat and help the cat pick up all these skills by themselves? Probably at that level, it might be very, very similar. But of course, the way teachers actually teach, or the learning, what I'm saying is that the learning for lower level might be very, very similar. But the teachers can actually employ AI tools to actually make their teaching far more efficient. But for the higher level, I think that is where we really need to think very, very clearly where this balance should be between decorative knowledge and some of the higher level knowledge that we need our students to actually acquire to function effectively in the post-AI world.
Michael? Annabelle?
This is actually a very interesting question. I think Michael actually talked a little bit about it, about interaction between AI systems and human, but now is talking about individual learning with the pedagogical system at the same time, but considering what AI can do. But I'd like to also link it to the implicit learning idea that you brought up earlier. So in terms of the cat, for example, right? So for implicit learning, in terms of cognitive neurosciences, we do know like mirror neurons in the brain do fire when we see what's happening on the outside, even though we are not actually actively doing it.
Yeah, and they create better memories as a result.
Exactly.
More valence, things like that. Yeah.
So it is creating networks already in the brain when they observe. So you can imagine the cat observing how to catch the mouse is actually learning implicitly in the brain. So if we could imagine like we could get those signals online, actively into the AI system at the same time, then the teacher, be it the AI teacher or be it a human teacher, could see it to see how effective were those neurons firing to represent the implicit learning, and then adjust the teaching component or the educational component to increase this. So this is a very simplistic model, but to sort of try and see if that is possible. That's where the uniqueness or the so-called promise of AI, right? Being able to synthesize and integrate all these different types of data at the same time. Could it give us more insights that we could adjust the teaching? So that's just...
No, that's great. I cannot pass up the opportunity to plug our research. And Alex there, his PhD was on this topic, which is implicit attention. And Andres, we're working in M3S on that topic. And I think it's quite very powerful. Michael, you were going to say something.
So that's more optimistic than I am about the future of neuroscience, but maybe I'm just a pessimist. This morning in, I think, the first panel, the sort of impoverishment of psychometrics' ability to measure things,
exactly,
I think
right.
looms large here, and I agree with everything that was said this morning. A psychometrics of prior knowledge or motivation or something would be a great call to action for people who work on those sorts of measurement problems in education. I think that's a bottleneck that needs to be broken to start addressing some of these problems.
Although, I mean, let me one-up you on the cynicism or the pessimism. I would make the argument that we teach what we can measure, as opposed to teaching what we need to teach. So, for example, critical thinking is hard to teach, hard to measure. It's hard to, now there's a PISA measure for it, but, so we just decided not to teach it, right? Because you can't put it in a standardized exam. So, well, forget it, let's not teach critical thinking. Art, creativity, you can't measure it. It's so vague, it's so subjective. Let's just get it out of the curriculum. So there's this perverse reverse effect, right? Don't you think? I mean, that's basically what he's referring to.
I mean, that's true, but of course the liberal arts have been assessing creative writing forever. Those things are also graded.
Well, but yet in Singapore, for example, Yale and US had to be established to try and, to really sort of cause the liberal arts to blossom. Right? Mm-hmm. I agree with you. I agree with you, right? But as we become more technocratic, hopefully AI will reverse that trend. It seems as if the subjective is losing out to the objective, and therefore the explicit is trumping the implicit.
I think, I don't know whether this brings us too far afield, but I think that is an interesting use case. Something I've observed in consulting with industry, so this one literally comes from a Netflix meeting a couple of weeks ago, is that previously in their feedback they valued the quantitative Likert scales or rating scales that are given because they can quantify and measure and summarize and give an executive summary and they're actionable in some way. And the qualitative comments have been included for completeness but not used so much. Large language models seem to almost be turning that on their head. They're very effective at summarizing what the qualitative comments people are providing, and the Netflix people regarded those as being more actionable, more useful than now the rating scales, and now they're concerned about all the biases in rating scales and order effects in doing it and individual differences, and all the problems in those measurements are looming large for them.
Look, we're trying to be provocative here, and you need to ask questions to provoke us, all right? If you don't provoke us, we're going to have to single-handedly up the provocation level to destruct.
Can I start?
Thank you, sir.
So first I'll ask a serious question, then I'll ask the provocative question. But I'll ask.
They could both be the same, actually.
Well, in this
they're
case,
not, it's not a dichotomy.
One thing, it's something, as somebody who's not a cognitive scientist, neuroscientist, etc. This is actually, I'm just trying to learn from you. because it starts with Lake Woon's point that you've also made to me, that for adult learners, one of the issues is not just learning, but the retention, the ability to retain. So fundamentally, because we have some neuroscientists and cognitive scientists in the room, what is it that we know as a profession can 40 and 50-year-olds learn? And what is it that causes them to forget? I mean, is there a very simple answer that you can give? And partly I ask the question because there are certain skills, it seems to me, we just can't learn. So skiing, swimming, cycling. Apparently, if you don't learn by 20, you're out. So no amount of AI can teach you how to do those things later on. So is that a fundamental lack in our, neural rewiring, et cetera? At that point, you just can't learn? So this is the serious question. What is it we know we can learn, and what is it we don't know how to learn? The second provocative question is, I come to these panels, and in Singapore we have a lot, I participate in a lot. And it seems all the panelists agree. So you're all agreeing that we're doing the science of learning a little bit wrong, we're not capturing implicit knowledge, etc. But that brings up the question. If we knew, you guys are the vanguard of the profession, if you knew this was wrong, then why are we here today? Why didn't we do the right things over the last 20 years?
So two questions. Thank you for the provocation, sir. Mission accomplished. Did you just, okay, that poaching is brilliant. So two questions. One is, can older people learn? People like me. Yeah, I'm young, so it doesn't count. You and I don't count. But can, as you get older, what skills can you learn? How plastic is the brain? Love to hear from all of you from an applied perspective, from a neuroscience perspective, from a cognitive psychology perspective. And your second question is, why the hell didn't you fix it? Basically, right? And actually, I thought Lake Woon addressed it, which is we fell into a trap. But we'll come back to that. But let's start with the first question. So, can we learn as we get older? Do my aspirations of becoming an Olympic skier, are they
Well, I tend to be more optimistic. Maybe you'll give the pessimistic.
About my Olympic skiing career, upcoming Olympic skiing career?
So we do know from neuroplasticity research that yes, everything goes downhill when we age in a way, but just now I mentioned they go downhill differently, but doesn't mean that neuroplasticity cannot happen anymore. We do know from research, that's where continual research informs us, that certain parts of the brain can still produce some neuronal plasticity, which is very rare, but synaptic plasticity, that means rewiring, or growing dendrites in the brain still can happen. So it's not that it's completely gone, it's still happening, but at a much slower rate.
Okay, so ski slowly.
And things like why procedural learning is difficult, right? Because you need a lot of practice and you need a lot of physical infrastructure.
So can the brain do automaticity later on in life or not really?
You still have to train. Yeah. So actually all these automation is through training the whole brain circuitry. We talk about the cerebellum and the cortex. Actually, it needs like a whole coordination to get it trained to be automatic. So it takes time. But if you can imagine if neuroplasticity is declining, so it will take more time and more effort for an older person to do it. So it's a matter of whether you have enough time, enough motivation, and willing to put in the extra effort.
So one more question, just because I thought there was another deeper sort of layer of Achin's questions. There's some things you cannot learn.
Yes.
Is that true?
So it's the limit. So depends. Right. So when there's a decline, like why memory, right, is problematic. Well, as we know, that's why we try to harness what we know from cognitive neuroscience about the brain development as we age. So what happens is what you get lost is what you lose first. So that's your frontal lobes. It declines first.
Interesting.
So your working memory actually decreases. So the ability, a lot of times when we learn, we need a lot of working memory. We keep a lot of things in mind while we try to consolidate and form those networks. But as it decreases, it takes it slower. But we do have other scaffolds that help us, and that is our semantic memory.
Semantic memory, schema, etc., etc.
Yeah, so your
Yeah.
semantics is important to scaffold. So in a way, although we can't be as fast, as nimble or agile as the young people when they learn, but we are older and wiser in that sense because we already have that scaffolding of experience. That's why we talked about in aging, the unique experience is contributing to our next learning to build on that.
Okay, so we compensate for our diminishing abilities with accrued frameworks, but at some point we start losing that race. That's the quick answer. The other question, and then we have two more questions here, is why the hell didn't you talked about it?
Maybe I can answer the question by saying that actually a big group of social scientists actually focus on measuring the tacit and the latent construct, right? Our whole career actually centers around trying to measure the latent, the unseen. So I don't think it is accurate to say that we only focus on what we can actually observe. Often we collect data, we collect behavioral measure because we are trying to actually dig at the hidden and the latent layer. The problem of that is that the sample size is necessarily small. So the biggest sample that we can achieve when you conduct long, laborious kind of instrument to actually measure something that is latent and hidden, you can only reach out to at most 1,000 or so individual. And that often is not good enough, and not good enough to actually have a very predictive model, and also the dimension of the data that you can have is also necessarily small. So, and which is why I was suggesting that maybe with AI, we can actually crunch through big data, multimodal data, and that may actually help us understand what we cannot directly observe, but that is actually is at a deeper level. Maybe just one more comment about teaching what we can measure. I think life will be a lot easier if all of us agree that whatever that we can measure are the only things that are important. I think the main reason why education is such a complicated endeavor is because all teachers actually deep in their heart knows that a lot of what they cannot measure, what they cannot directly score is actually, they are precisely the most important thing that they need to teach.
And those are the great teachers.
And I would think that most teachers are like that. I'm a lot more optimistic than that. I think it's just that a lot of teachers, under the pressure of time, under the pressure of maybe personal survival, they have no choice but to prioritize what others measure, right? But actually deep in it, every teacher, every lecturer, they know that learning and teaching is more than just getting good scores. And often they also try to intervene by actually assigning higher score to those that they think actually have the essence and the quality in them, but may not, their quality may not be manifested in the scores that they actually produce or in the test paper that they actually produce.
As the son of a teacher, I agree.
Achin, can I just answer your provocative question differently? I think you're just seeing survivor bias. So if there's a conference of 100 subject matter experts, the 3 you get to see are the 3 who are already convinced. The other 97 don't want to come because they think this isn't something they work on.
It's good.
So I'm going to ask maybe 3 broad areas, and I know these people well because I used to be at the Ministry of Education as well. No, but one of the things that I learned a lot at the Ministry of Education was that actually among the really deep teachers, there is a concept of disciplinarity. Disciplinarity from the perspective that when you teach a particular subject area very well, there's a particular way in which thinking, the logic of thinking and so on is constructed within each of the subject matters. And as a result, when we first started teaching, this whole idea of disciplinarity actually is a way to actually ensure that metacognition, whichever way we try to think about the world, has a certain consistency and coherency. right? But of course, as we then started teaching the subjects, I sometimes feel like we forget why we teach those subjects. I'll just give you an example. When I was there, I interacted with Kerry quite a bit. He had this research project, this Kerry Lee, he had this research project that actually looked at how improving working memory improved the performance of math. So the question I threw back at him is, are we trying to improve working memory so as to improve math? Or did we teach math in the first place to actually improve working memory? Okay, so then I wonder whether when we become, in our quest to be objective, in our quest to be fair, in our quest to be sort of like, have a way to account for what we have taught and what the student has learned, have we lost the plot in the sense of saying that actually this whole panel perspective of looking at how people are learning makes us miss the point of actually each individual is somehow different, and that when we measure, how should we think about measurement and how should we think about assessment? So I then come back to this idea that, well, we have this concept of the CPA, the Curriculum Pedagogy Assessment. Should CPA be much more individualized? Understanding where each person is, and as a result, knowing what we are testing for and why we are testing for it, and of course then having a certain clarity of what exactly are we trying to teach or learn, so that we actually adjust accordingly to each individual on the basis of what we're trying to do. And of course then, if we start to think that way, then this idea of understanding the adaptability or the context, we talk about adult learners, is always what context did they bring with them in the classroom, what were their experiences in life, how do we use that to shape the way we then do what exactly we're trying to do in that phase of that learning. I think it's important. Of course then maybe that's for the adult learner, and for the younger learners, maybe it's actually understanding what are the aptitudes and interests so that we get their neurons to be fired and engaged in the way that we teach them. One final point I want to bring out is that we talk about this skiing, and all that stuff, and you can't do it when you're older. I was just reading some of these things about, actually, it's the fact that we actually, how should I say, crystallized intelligence is a lookup table that our brain comes up with to make our cognitive load reduce. That lookup table exists even for motor cognitive skills. After a while, we forget about thinking about walking and we just walk. But that lookup table is what stops us from learning new things. And we don't unwire that or rewire that. So I want to ask about this concept of unlearning and relearning, and how that concept of unlearning and relearning needs to be part of how we think about adult learning. But more importantly, I feel that there is an opportunity for AI to really fundamentally change that, right? Challenge the person, make that person rethink some of the stuff that they were thinking about previously. But in that process, open up the vista for them to learn going forward. So a few of this,
Thank you. Michael, do you want to take the first piece?
I think I lost what the question was.
Well, so the second piece was on crystallized learning, unlearning, and so on. And the earlier comment was about, how would you express it, about the
disciplinarity, and then how the disciplinarity can result in the way we teach, but then we forgot what we were trying to teach in the first place.
Basically, the philosophical, why do we teach, what do we teach? Does the math make you, is it there to increase your memory?
I don't see why it can't be both. I mean, I can imagine if your working memory is good, that can improve your ability to solve mathematical problems, and as you do that, your working memory improves further. I think this is fundamental.
What is the actual objective we're trying to achieve? Is it to do well at math, or to improve working memory so that you function much better as an individual?
Well, I think we should take a step back a little bit. There's, if you go back even a couple of thousand years, if you go back to the philosophers, Chinese, Greek, Indian, Middle Eastern, at least those are the ones we have records of. If you go back to these philosophers, there is a question of why we learn, right? And you have to go back to the bottom line, which is to live a better life, to earn an income, to be able to have a happy life, right, and so on. And then you got to work your way backwards. Math is both a skill, but math also is a way to develop frameworks, ways of thinking, disciplines of thinking, as well as doing math, as you said, increases your working memory, which will have other implications as well. That's why I think the design of a curriculum is very important. And to come back to your point, Nikman, my view is that I've never felt that just because you have calculators, students should not learn the multiplication table. I believe that those procedural skills are extremely important, that memory is very important as well. So this is all going to become fundamentally, in my view, we have to re-examine it in the era of AI. And this is a good moment. That's why when I gave my talk, I said we can't just bolt AI on to layers of historical neglect. We have to go back and almost rebuild it. And then AI will be a benefit. But if you just bolt it on as some panacea, I think we're going to end up in a bad place. Other question on your second question, your second comment was about. You want to take it?
Okay, neuroplasticity,
Neuroplasticity,
actually.
later neuroplasticity,
so actually,
crystallization.
you raised a good question in terms of. CPA approaches.
CPA, yeah. Personalization, basically.
Personalization.
Yeah. And the third is crystallization.
Oh, okay. So I'll take on the neuroplasticity first since I started. And I think you make a good point that I didn't mention is that neuroplasticity sounds like a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. It can go either way, right? So if you think about rehabilitation from stroke, from brain injury, if it doesn't go well, neuroplasticity could interfere with the rewiring of the brain in the correct way, for example. So like what you said, indeed, it could prevent, like if you scaffolded something really rigidly, strongly, if you are experiencing a new learning but is interfering or is against what you have already established, it will be more difficult to rewire, but it doesn't mean that you can't, right? So the other thing that we've been looking at is cognitive flexibility. To what extent, or how flexible can you be? Can we train that to help you to then rewire and change? So that is another consideration, although it's not that simplistic, but those are good considerations to look into. And to what extent, I think perhaps with artificial intelligence could tell us a little bit more about the individual differences in reaction to this kind of new learning that we need to do.
I'll give you a sort of on crystallization. Bias is an unfortunate crystallization.
Yeah.
Predatory behavior is an unfortunate crystallization. There's a professor, I don't recall his name, forgive me, in Barcelona. What he does is he takes convicts who've been sexual predators, and he, in virtual reality, puts them in the body of their victims and uses that to sort of decrystallize, to invoke plasticity and retrain them in either it's racism, it's sexual harassment, whatever it is, or sexual assault, to sort of break it. But it's not an easy thing, and I think these are all research topics that will evolve. I got my 5-minute warning about a minute and a half ago, and this poor gentleman's been waiting, so apologies, go ahead.
My name is William, a computer engineering student from the National University of Singapore. And my question is directed towards all the panelists, but specifically to Dr. Oon for your experience in MOE. So I remember about 6 or 7 years ago, there was a school in mainland, I think it was in the city of Beijing, that did a pilot session where a primary school classroom deployed EEG sensors to the students. And I remember when the news first came out, it incurred a huge international backlash because people thought that you were intruding on privacy and so on and so forth. But nowadays, given the increasing adoption of AI, and just now we were talking about how, when we have mirror neurons being activated in your brain, you couldn't really see them, but these are signs of activation of brain activities that show signs of engagement. And there's a greater need to measure the unseen, right? Or to get a sense of the latent learning that is ongoing in the students where you cannot directly observe. Do you think that now is the right time, or if not, why do you think that's the case, to deploy this kind of educational technology like EEG in or beyond classroom for us to better understand and measure students' learning in a classroom? Thank you.
Actually, a quick
I think we should put EEGs in every classroom. What do you think?
Yeah, actually, a quick answer is that actually we do it in a small scale, but it's in the form of a pilot or research studies. So we funded research project to deploy eye tracker the MIT-SMU, the web-like thing that you put on the young children's head. I think my take is that we have no principal kind of objection to actually some of these approaches that can actually help us understand the students better. So what to me is a challenge is actually the decision to scale, right? So if we do it in a small setting, especially with consent.
So research, basically.
Yes, research setting. I think that is perfectly fine. When we have actually good evidence to demonstrate that it is actually efficacious, it is actually effective, then I see no reason why it cannot be actually deployed in a classroom. In fact, we were having discussion with Professor Lindenberger. He was talking about the possibility of doing repeated low Tesla MRI. And I thought that is actually a fantastic idea, right? I mean, if you can do that, and if we can bring the cost down, we can actually remove the risk. And if that can actually tell us a lot about the kids and how to individualize learning for them, I think that is something that we should not actually just write off.
So research, yes. Dystopia, no. How's that? All right, Shiva.
Yeah. I wanted to bring up another, not a provocative question, but maybe an observation that was related to what you all said. Maybe start with you, Sanjay, because we've been discussing quite a bit. This January, I visited Stanford. I visited a faculty area at my Professor David Cully of D School and the Stanford School of Mechanical Engineering. One of the things I really observed, and my simple question to him was, how do you popularize design thinking? How do you teach creativity? How do you popularize and how do you teach creativity? Because this is one of the fundamental things that Professor Kelly has been popularizing for a while, right? Which I think many of you know his work. In fact, he came and taught at Sloan as well. So Professor Kelly took me into his D school. He kind of totally amazed me about how he changes the way he teaches, right? The layout of the classroom, the way the furniture is designed, its open layout, the fail fast, fail quickly kind of thing that he brought into IDEO, getting into the minds of his students, drawing some design thinking specialists from the industry, and it was kind of really amazing. So my question to the panel is, isn't there some hope to teach things, difficult things like creativity, or maybe even things like strategy that another great professor, Arnoldo Hacks, who's no more, at Sloan used to teach, which I won't get into because of lack of time. For example, like Professor Kelly, right? Creativity, design thinking, fail fast, fail often, innovative design of furniture, and the whole environment, right? Don't you think there's some hope? And then, of course, his course in D School is really, really popular. Popular to the extent that one of the SAP leaders, Plattner, he put in 45 million, and the D School was born, right? So just
the Plattner Institute, yeah. So lightning responses. We'll start with Michael, if you are able to take a lightning shot at it after you disassemble your mic.
Yeah. So same answer I mentioned earlier. I think the embodied cognition idea and the structure of the environment, that's where I would focus the effort to understand, in a formal sense, the way people learn. I would include the environment very explicitly as the trigger for learning. So rather than just some impoverished channel of basic instruction that's being dealt with, it needs a much richer model of the environment as well as the learner, and it needs to take the situatedness and embodiedness seriously, I think.
Yeah, that's a very good point. In fact, I think we are looking into trying to I wouldn't say teach, because it's quite difficult to hone down what's the definition of all those constructs that you mentioned, right? But to promote like creativity, design thinking, and all that. In fact, they're teaching design thinking, I think, and all these higher metacognition level of thinking in students. I think they are promoting, but it's more of like, how do we design it in a naturalistic way in the classroom? Like you said, the environment and all that has a factor, or is a factor to consider. And also interactions between the students, or even the materials or the topics, how that could promote these characteristics that we're looking at.
Lekun?
A quick answer is actually definitely I think we have made some headway. I think the only limitation is really the scalability. So far a lot of the examples that you give, the rate determining step seems to be quality teachers, right? So, and in order for you to have quality teachers to actually be able to enact the type of design thinking lessons or creative writing lessons, you just need to find a way to actually teach them, train them, and then socialize them into the practice. Because a lot of the high quality expert practice is actually not codified and not in explicit knowledge. You have to actually try and error to a certain extent based on actually what you have observed, what you have been taught, and then discuss, model. And I think to me that is actually the difficulty of scaling some of these good learning and teaching practices. So again, if AI can actually help us create a better theory, a better model, then we will be able to actually have more high quality teachers or teachers that can actually enact high quality teaching.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just end, have the privilege of closing the session by saying that I think the first thing you can do to enhance creativity is to stop killing it. And our systems are designed to impede, channel, and kill creativity because frankly, and to be blunt and absolutely cynical about it, in some ways, many of our traditional systems were designed to create cogs in a machine. But if you saw that kitten, no lack of creativity, no lack of curiosity. The dopaminergic circuit is triggered by novelty and curiosity, and I think it can be unleashed. With that, I just want to thank you all, but more importantly, thank our panelists. So thank you very much to Annabelle, to Michael, and to Lekun. Thank you very much. Thank you.